Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to be speaking about the left back situation at Wolverhampton Wanderers currently. Now with the signing of David Moller Wolfe, I think the situation gets even more interesting for the likes of Hugo Bueno and Rodrigo Gomez. So let's get straight into this one. Now, first up, who in my opinion is going to be the starting wing back next season is David Moller Wolfe. Now, obviously, they're not going to have brought him in for 12 million euros as a whole package to not start him. He's physically imposing. He's more comfortable defensively than Hugo Bueno and Rodrigo Gomez, who we're both going to be covering in this video. He offers a lot going forward. He's very dangerous in the attacking penalty box. He progresses the ball to almost an elite level, to be quite honest, and generally is a really, really exciting player. And also, he's obviously a Norwegian international, so I don't think he's going to come in and sit on the bench. Now, he obviously spoke in his interview saying how much the agent Larson had helped him as well, and how much he enjoyed being able to link up with him again. Obviously, he does on the international stage as well, so that's going to be interesting. But equally for me, I just don't see how David Moller Wolfe doesn't get in this Wolves side. I think he's going to be the one who's starting week in, week out. Whether he starts on the opening day of the season is interesting. Obviously, we'll probably only see him in the Celta Vigo friendly. That'll probably be the only friendly competitive games, well, somewhat competitive game, that he will come in and play in, to be honest. So that's going to be an interesting one. Now, for me, as I've said, physically imposing, a lot taller than the other two options in the side, which I think has been quite an interesting feature of a lot of Wolves' transfer business over the last 18 months, really. You look at the players they've brought in, Strand Larsen's physically imposing. Manetzi is a big lad, to be fair. He's not, completely massive, I'm not saying that, but again, a big lad. Agbadu, of course, a big lad. You always expect that from a centre-back, of course. And then you look at Jean Arias, a player who's not particularly massive, but in terms of physical stature and in terms of having that sort of fight in him, he is definitely one of those players as well. Fer Lopez isn't as short as you'd associate sort of Spanish players with either. So generally, I think that's been quite an interesting feature of Wolves' transfer business over the last sort of few months, really. I think it's really interesting to break that down. But in terms of David Moller Wolfe, he definitely starts for this Wolves side, in my opinion. Like I say, maybe not on the first game of the season because of his limited minutes in pre-season, but ultimately, I think he will be Wolves' starting left back next season. So let's move on to who I think probably will be second choice next season. Now, the person who I think will be second choice next season, unless anything happens, is Hugo Bueno. Now, a really interesting profile, a really interesting player, very technically good, got a brilliant delivery on him from around that 25-30 yard range, just whipping it in, which I think Wolves could utilise with the likes of Sasa Kalajic late on in games, or Strand Larsen obviously as well throughout games, despite not scoring as many headers as you might think. But generally, Hugo Bueno's got a really nice delivery on him. He's technically brilliant. He's not rapid, but he's nippy. He's agile. And generally, I think his passing is quite decent in terms of, as I've said, deliveries, but also in terms of linking up with midfielders down that sort of left channel. I think he's very good at that as well. Now, Hugo Bueno for me as well, as much as I do like a lot of his abilities, as most of you will know on this channel, I am heavily critical of him on a few aspects of his game. I do think defensively, his defensive awareness is nowhere near good enough. Often you see he gets beaten at the back post, or you see that perhaps he doesn't realise that there's an overlapping runner, or the overlapping runner perhaps ghosts him, or someone underlaps him and he just doesn't realise it's there. And generally, Hugo Bueno is one of them for me that I think gets beaten too easily defensively at points, and definitely has that error in him, and Wolves will notice that next season if he plays as regularly as some might think. Obviously, he could easily rotate and come in. Now, the reason I want to speak about Bueno more importantly is because obviously he's nowhere near as physically imposing, of course, as David Moller Wolfe as well. But in terms of Bueno, I want to speak about him for a few reasons, because I do think that he is one of those players that Wolves can get a really decent fee for. Now, obviously, as you can see here, his market value is apparently 8 million euros. Wolves wouldn't accept 8 million pounds for him. I think Hugo Bueno could demand a 13 to 15 million pound fee, which would be absolutely brilliant business for a backup left back that realistically Wolves will have a depth cover for, therefore, if we speak about in a minute. But I do think if Wolves could get 15 million for Hugo Bueno, do they turn that down? I know there's been a lot of outgoings this summer, but equally, Hugo Bueno's not going to start in this Wolves side. In my opinion, I don't think he will. And also, he's been playing Champions League football, he's been playing Dutch Cup football, he's been playing Eredivisie football last season. Is he going to want to come in, having seen that David Moller Wolfe has signed, and want to be a backup, having played pretty much, a majority of finals games last season? For me, it just doesn't seem to make much sense for him to do that for his career. And also, for Wolves, really, like I say, they can get get a decent fee for Hugo Bueno, in my opinion. I did say prior to Bournemouth signing Truffert that he would have been a really good addition for Andoni Iraola's side. Ultimately, that will not happen now because they've signed Truffert. But generally, I think there's a lot of clubs around Europe, especially for Hugo Bueno, in terms of what his game suits. I think a lot of clubs around Europe will be looking at him in the Portuguese league. I think you get a lot of suitors. I think you get a lot of suitors in the Spanish league as well because of his technical brilliance. As much as he's not unbelievable defensively, they look for technical aspects over defensive sort of awareness and defensive capabilities over there. So I think Hugo Bueno would be really good in one of those sort of leagues, really. I think he'd excel over there. So, but let me know what you think about Hugo Bueno, Wolves fans. I know most of you probably will want to see him be the backup, but equally, I think he's one of them players in the squad that Wolves can get a really decent fee for a player that realistically isn't going to start every game. And finally, we've got Rodrigo Gomez. Now, this is a really interesting one again. Now, a player that is actually shorter than Hugo Bueno, as I briefly mentioned about Bueno not being physically imposing. However, Rodrigo Gomez is a player that, everyone can consider playing off that left, can play off that right, playing off the sort of the wing-back options on the left and right, and of course, further up the pitch. Now, Rodrigo Gomez is a really interesting one for me because I don't think he's too dissimilar to Bueno in his defensive capabilities. Now, a lot of you will remember the Crystal Palace game where he was very, very poor. But ultimately, in terms of his defensive capabilities, he really isn't a million miles off Bueno, if not actually better than Bueno, to be honest. So I do think that's one thing that Wolves should be also considering, is the fact that he is sort of... One thing for me about Rodrigo Gomez and going into the season is the fact that there's just ultimately not a clear place for him, a clear plan for him in the side, in the starting 11, because he's not going to be playing in the right 10, he's not going to be playing in the left 10, he's not going to be playing as as a striker. So ultimately, that leaves the wing-back positions alone, and obviously, I think he's probably best playing off the right as maybe a more advanced right player, but it just doesn't work in this Wolves system, in my opinion, and I don't think he gets minutes, given the likes of Jean Arias, Fer Lopez, Jean-Martin Bellegarde's played there, Monetzi's played there. There's so many options in those areas, and Wolves potentially will bring in another forward as well, so I just think it makes things really difficult. Now, Rodrigo Gomez off the left, I think for me, would make complete sense. His market value is still high. He's not going to be happy sitting on the bench for another season at just 22 years old, in my opinion. And if I was him, I wouldn't either, given the fact that you already know that Porto have looked at him this window, and that's probably one of the dream moves for a player coming from Portugal, really. So for me, I think Rodrigo Gomez needs minutes this season, and I think the way he can get that is playing that left wing back role, and being a rotational option, and ultimately the same for the right wing back option. However, I do think Hervé's got that second choice spot locked down. Now, as I've said, I think it's really, really interesting going into next season who will play that left wing back position. I personally, for me, I would take the gamble on Rodrigo Gomez and look at how many sort of clubs are in for Hugo Bueno. If there's not that many clubs offering decent money for Bueno, I would stick with Bueno potentially. But then you've got an awkward position with Rodrigo Gomez as well, because he's one of them players for me that you could almost look at as probably that like Vitinha at Wolves, maybe, where he comes in, it doesn't really get in the side, doesn't really fit the side, and then ultimately he goes on to have an amazing career. And Rodrigo Gomez strikes me as one of those players. I think he's absolutely excellent, and I would love to see him thrive in this Wolves side, but if not, I think he will thrive somewhere else in Europe ultimately, because I think he is a real talent. Now, let me know what you think, Wolves fans, about this, because there's a lot of debate around the wing-back options at the moment, of course, on both sides, but I do think on that left-hand side, I think Moller Wolfe is undoubtedly going to be the first choice for Vitor Pereira, but then, who would you like to see as that second choice? Please let me know in the comments, because I love interacting with them. Now, if you did enjoy this video, I'd really appreciate it if you would like it, if you would comment below what you thought about the video, what you think about the options for next season, and sort of your thoughts on it, because I really value your opinions, as always, and I always interact with you in the comments. And also subscribe to the channel, because we are trying to hit 2,000 subscribers before the start of the 2025-26 Premier League season. Now, that seems unlikely, I am well aware, but the initial goal was 1,000 subscribers, and we've absolutely smashed that out of the park. So thank you for all the support on this channel recently. I really do appreciate you all. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.